The soil was dark, dense, and damp, sticking to the edge of the trowel with every turn. Emma Carter stood near the center of the field, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp loam and the faint, sharp tang of coming rain. Her father moved with a steady, mechanical rhythm. He pressed his thumb into the ground, dropped a single seed, and covered it with a flick of his wrist. He did not rush. He did not look for results. He worked as if the act of planting was a complete conversation between his hands and the field. Emma watched the lines of turned earth stretch out toward the tree line, a map of intention laid out in the dirt. There was no sound but the soft thud of soil and the distant rustle of wind through the tall grass. It was a quiet morning, yet the weight of the work felt absolute. Every seed placed was a promise, a commitment to a future that remained invisible under the surface. She watched him move to the next spot, his back bent, his focus entirely on the ground beneath his feet, anchoring the morning in a silence that demanded nothing but time. The final seed vanished beneath a light dusting of dirt. Her father stood up, his joints popping in the quiet air, and wiped his hands clean against his palms. Emma stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the patch of earth where the last seed had fallen. She reached down, her fingers twitching with the urge to brush away the soil, to see if the husk had already begun to split. Her father caught her wrist. His grip was firm, not angry, but absolute. He pulled her hand back and held it there for a long breath. He did not look at the field again. He turned his back on the rows of fresh earth as if they were already finished history. He walked toward the farmhouse, his pace steady, his head held level. Emma stayed behind for a moment, watching the unbroken surface of the ground. She looked at the horizon, then back at the dirt. There was no sign of life, no movement, only the vast stillness of the land. She realized then that he never checked. He would not return tomorrow, nor the day after. He trusted the process to happen in the dark, without his oversight. She turned and followed his path, leaving the field to the soil and the silence. Years later, the silence of the farm had been replaced by the relentless, low-frequency hum of server banks. Emma Carter sat in a glass-walled office that felt like a vacuum. Everything here was white, gray, or the cold blue flicker of a dozen monitors. There was no soil, only the slick surface of a desk and the harsh glow of data streams. Volatile stock charts danced across the screens in jagged, aggressive lines, updating every millisecond. The air did not smell of rain or loam. It smelled of recycled oxygen and dry, overheated plastic. She leaned back, the ergonomic chair offering no warmth, only mechanical support. Outside the glass, the world moved with a frantic, jittery pace. People paced the floor in tight, restless circles, their voices rising and falling in sharp bursts of urgency. Every movement in the room was sharp, jagged, and immediate. Emma stared at the numbers. She did not feel the wind on her face or the grit of dirt under her nails. She felt only the steady, cold pulse of the terminal. The contrast was absolute. Where the field had demanded patience and yielded life, this office demanded speed and yielded only numbers. She placed her hands on the keyboard, her posture rigid, watching the digital harvest flicker before her eyes. The office erupted into a frenzy. A chorus of voices rose, jagged and high-pitched, as the monitors began to pulse with urgent, erratic data. Colleagues paced the narrow aisles between desks, their steps heavy and uncoordinated, faces tight with the strain of watching the charts plummet. The sound of keyboards clicking became a frantic, irregular percussion that filled the room. Emma sat motionless at her terminal. She did not lean forward. She did not check the news feeds or join the shouting. She watched the screen with an unblinking focus that stood in total defiance of the panic surrounding her. A colleague stopped at her side, pointing a shaking finger at the cascading numbers. "The market is crashing, Emma. Look at the margins. Why are you just sitting there?" Emma did not turn her head. She kept her hands folded in her lap, fingers relaxed, breathing at a steady, rhythmic pace that ignored the chaos of the room. The frantic movement of the others seemed to blur at the edges of her vision, irrelevant and distant. She was an island of absolute stillness in a sea of digital noise. Her composure, a sharp, deliberate rejection of the panic that gripped everyone else in the room. The descent accelerated. The screens turned a violent, bleeding crimson. Every chart on the wall collapsed, the lines dropping like stones into a bottomless well. A collective gasp echoed through the office. followed by a surge of shouting that swallowed the room whole. Phones began to ring in unison, a discordant, high-pitched alarm that grated on the nerves. Coworkers scrambled to their feet, their chairs scraping loudly against the floor. Some grabbed their heads, pacing in tight, frantic loops, while others stared at the monitors with wide, disbelieving eyes. The air grew thick with the static of pure panic. Red bars stretched across every display, signaling a total wipeout of value. The noise was constant now, a roar of anxiety that vibrated through the desks. Every eye in the room turned toward the main ticker, waiting for a bounce that never came. The pressure was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the space. Yet, amidst the slamming of desks and the frantic keyboard tapping, Emma remained a fixed point. The red light reflected in her eyes, flickering against her steady gaze. She watched the numbers fall, the devastation unfolding in real time, while the walls seemed to close in on the rest of the floor. The shouting reached a crescendo, but to Emma, the noise had become white static. Her fingers moved with a rhythmic, measured cadence, ignoring the frantic energy surrounding her desk. She tapped the screen, navigating past the flashing warnings of the market crash. Her movements were precise, devoid of hesitation or doubt. She located the command, lingered for a fraction of a second, and pressed the button. The transaction confirmed. She had bought into the collapse. Without checking the result, she reached for the edge of her laptop. The metal clicked softly as she folded it shut, cutting off the glow of the red charts. The sudden darkness on her desk felt like a closing door. She stood up, smoothing her workspace with a single, calm motion. She did not look at the monitors, nor at the colleagues clutching their heads in despair. She turned her back on the chaos, walking toward the break room with the same measured, steady gait her father had used when he left his fields behind. She did not look back to see if the seeds would sprout. She simply walked away, leaving the panic behind her like dust in the wind. The break room was a sanctuary of silence compared to the roar of the trading floor. Emma lifted the glass pot, the coffee steaming in the cool air, and filled her mug to the brim. She took a slow, steady sip, feeling the heat settle in her chest. The door swung open with a violent thud. A colleague stumbled in, his breath ragged, his eyes darting toward the hallway he had just fled. He spotted Emma and pointed an accusing finger at her, his hand shaking. "The market is crashing, Emma. We are losing everything. Why are you just sitting there?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Emma did not look up. She traced the rim of her mug, her focus entirely on the dark, swirling liquid inside. She set the mug down on the counter with a sharp, final click. "My father never dug up his crops to see if they were growing," she said. Her voice was level, carrying no trace of the panic that gripped the room outside. He trusted the soil. I trust the math. She turned away from him, leaving the confession of her logic hanging in the room. She walked past him, her pace deliberate, returning to her desk as if the financial apocalypse were nothing more than a passing breeze. Back at her desk, the routine took hold. Every month, a precise portion of her paycheck flowed into the account, regardless of the noise outside. When the market surged green, she invested. When the red bars bled across the screens, she invested more. She watched the volatility not as a threat, but as a seasonal shift. Her portfolio became a vast, hidden field in the dead of winter. It was quiet. It was dormant. It was entirely invisible to the frantic eyes of her peers. Beneath the frost of market corrections, the numbers shifted and expanded. She treated each deposit like a seed dropped into frozen earth, trusting the slow, inevitable geometry of the process. Years blurred into a steady rhythm of input and patience. The red days were just the cold, and the green days were merely the thaw. She did not seek updates or chase the peaks. She simply worked, month after month, year after year, allowing the compounding pressure of time to do the labor. The field beneath the frost grew heavier with every cycle, hidden from the world, expanding in the silence of her discipline. The final click of the mouse echoed in the near-empty office. 10 years of repetitive, invisible labor distilled into a single, blinking line of data. Emma leaned forward, her eyes scanning the screen. The balance sat there in plain text, 7 figures. The number was large, yet it felt strangely light. She did not lean back in victory or reach for a phone to share the news. Instead, she stared at the digits until they blurred, seeing not just the currency, but the 1,000 mornings of discipline that had summoned them into existence. She pushed her chair back, the wheels rolling across the carpet with a dull, rhythmic sound. She stood up, feeling the stiffness in her shoulders, and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling glass. The city skyline stretched out before her, a grid of lights as complex and vast as the math she had mastered. She pressed a hand against the cold surface of the pane, observing the movement of the traffic below. The work was finished. The harvest was ready. There was no rush to claim it, only the heavy, satisfying weight of knowing that the cycle had finally reached its end. Emma reached into her pocket and withdrew the worn photograph of the farm. She placed it carefully on the clean, empty surface of her desk, the paper edges curling slightly against the wood. The numbers on the screen were merely the final yield of a decade-long season. She closed the account tab, the glow from the monitor vanishing instantly and leaving the room in shadows. She stood still for a moment, listening to the hum of the building's ventilation system, a sound that no longer felt like pressure, but like the quiet rustle of wind through dry stalks. She walked toward the door, her pace measured and deliberate. She reached for the light switch, her fingers finding the plastic toggle. With a single click, the office went dark. She stepped into the hallway, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. The harvest was collected, the soil was turned, and the cycle was complete. She did not look back. She walked toward the elevator, already calculating the requirements for the next season, the next field, and the next decade of growth. The future was not a destination, but a series of seeds waiting for the right moment to be dropped.